Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was more than just a name, he was a phenomenon. But behind the glitz and glamour, a tragic tale unfolds, starting with the loss that would never truly leave him, the death of his mother, Gladys. It's hard to fathom how a single event could change a person so profoundly, but for Elvis, it was the beginning of a downward spiral. It was a typical day in 1958 when Elvis received news that would shatter his world. His mother, Gladys, who had always been his rock, his confidant, was in grave danger. She had been battling health issues, drinking too much, and was now facing a serious illness. In a desperate bid to save her, Elvis pleaded with his father, Vernon, to let him see her. Finally, after a harrowing 2 days, he got the chance. The moment he held her in his arms, it was clear she was slipping away. In those final hours, Elvis cried, pleaded, and loved his mother, but it was all too late. Gladys passed away at just 46 years old. The impact of her death was immediate and devastating. Elvis, who had always been close to his mother, was like a ship without anchor. He became frantic, threatening to leave the army if he didn't get an emergency leave. When he finally saw his mother laid to rest, the grief was overwhelming. He tried to join her in the grave, clutching her pink housecoat, kissing it lovingly for days. Journalist Charles Hirschberg captured the heartbreaking scene, calling it the most pitiful sight you ever saw. The loss of his mother changed Elvis fundamentally. He was no longer the carefree, charismatic young man who had captured the world. His Aunt Lillian Mann Smith noted the transformation, saying, "He changed completely. He didn't seem like Elvis ever again." The once vibrant performer was now a shadow of his former self. The pain of losing his mother was compounded by the pressures of his military service and the changing dynamics with his father. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, had always been a source of tension. He was jealous of Elvis's fame and struggled to connect with his son. After Gladys's death, this relationship only worsened. Elvis became more responsible, taking on the role of provider, but it was a heavy burden. His stepbrother Rick Stanley recalled, Elvis never really got over his mother's death. The king of rock and roll was lost without his guiding light. The army, meant to be a rite of passage, only added to Elvis's woes. Stationed in Germany, he was far from home and the only family he had left. The mundane life in the 3rd Armored Division was a stark contrast to his glamorous past. United Artists music executive Marilyn Petrone observed, Elvis hated his life in the 3rd Armored Division. It was so dull and conformist compared to his recent glamorous life. The boredom and isolation took their toll and whispers of drug use began to circulate. Back home, the situation was no better. Vernon's relationship with Dee Stanley, a married woman, caused further strain. Elvis refused to attend their wedding, and even after they moved to Graceland, relations remained strained. The house that was once a symbol of love became a battleground. Friend Buzzy Forbes recounted how Elvis lost his temper when Dee redecorated without permission, seeing it as an intrusion into his mother's home. As Elvis spent more time in Hollywood making movies and trying to maintain his image, he increasingly retreated into a more private and less exciting life. Broadway composer Jerry Herman noted, the new tamed Elvis was nowhere as exciting, but now things were easier and more lucrative. With more free time and less pressure to perform live, Elvis began to develop habits that would haunt him. He became more reclusive, and his connection to his fans, who had carried him through his toughest times, began to fade. Columnist Rady Harris pointed out what dampened Elvis' spirit was the loss of his adoring audiences. He lost touch with the public. The king's spirit, once unbreakable, was now fragile. The combination of his mother's death, military service, and personal conflicts had taken a heavy toll. As the years went by, Elvis struggled to maintain his public persona, and the boy who had once danced with the world now seemed distant and isolated. The loss of his mother was the first crack in the king's armor, and it would take more than fame and fortune to mend the wounds of his heart. Elvis Presley's journey to stardom wasn't straightforward. It was a path filled with rejections and setbacks. At first, he wanted badly to join a band, but kept getting turned down. Singing for his family's income didn't pay the bills. While driving a truck, he taught himself electrician skills, but his dreams of music remained alive. His chance at the Grand Ole Opry was brief. He was told he wasn't going anywhere, but then something big happened. Elvis found a bigger break on a southern radio show called Louisiana Hayride. This was a stepping stone, but the real game changer was meeting Colonel Tom Parker. This man, whose real name was Andreas Cornelis van Kuijk, had a knack for spotting talent and making it big. But his path to becoming Elvis's manager was anything but straightforward. Colonel Parker was more than just a manager, he was a man with secrets. Born in the Netherlands, he fled his hometown under mysterious circumstances in 1929, leaving behind a trail of trouble. In the US, he reinvented himself as Tom Parker and started working in carnivals and as a con artist. His skills landed him a job managing country singer Eddie Arnold, but things ended badly when Arnold fired him for being too controlling. When Parker met Elvis, he saw something special. It wasn't just Elvis's voice that caught his eye, it was how the young man made the audience react. Parker realized Elvis could be a star beyond just country music. He saw potential in rock and roll and love ballads. Parker moved quickly to push out Elvis's previous manager and won over Elvis's parents, Vernon and Gladys. Vernon was easily swayed by the promise of easy money, while Gladys was more skeptical but eventually convinced by Parker's success in selling Elvis's record contract to RCA. Parker's deal with Elvis was shady from the start. As Elvis was underage, he couldn't sign contracts on his own. Parker took advantage of this, taking a huge cut of Elvis's earnings, first 25%, later increasing it to 50%. Elvis was unaware of Parker's side deals and the reasons behind turning down international performances. Parker kept Elvis close, fearing the loss of his golden goose. The Colonel's lack of a US passport meant he couldn't travel abroad, a fact that kept Elvis tied to him. Parker's ambition was clear. He wanted to control every aspect of Elvis's career and image. This controlling nature would later define much of Elvis's life and legacy. Through Parker's influence, Elvis transitioned from a local sensation to a national and eventually global icon. But this journey was paved with the sacrifices and complexities of their relationship, setting the stage for the legend we know today. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, might have lived a different life if he had taken a role in the 1976 movie A Star Is Born. This chance was lost when Barbra Streisand got the part instead, thanks to Elvis's manager, the Colonel, who didn't agree with the idea. If Elvis had starred alongside Barbra Streisand, he could have continued his career as a leading man in Hollywood. This could have changed the course of his life, allowing him to make more movies and reduce his reliance on live performances. Elvis's manager, Tom Parker, played a big role in steering Elvis toward more tour after seeing how successful Elvis was in Las Vegas. These tours were tough on Elvis, both physically and emotionally. They contributed to his drug use, which Parker didn't focus on as much as the fact that the tour were profitable for him. Parker controlled the tour, unlike movie roles where Elvis would have to share the reins with other people. Elvis's looks were legendary. Many women, including famous actresses like Natalie Wood and K.D. Lang, were captivated by his beauty. Even as a young fan, lesbian singer-songwriter K.D. Lang was drawn to his androgynous looks. However, Elvis himself didn't see himself as handsome, showing a humble side. His beauty was a double-edged sword, opening doors but also attracting jealousy. In the 1950s, Elvis's potential was initially overlooked by some. For instance, he didn't get a chance on the popular TV talent show hosted by Arthur Godfrey. This show could have been a big break for him. Instead, it was his unique sound and style that finally caught the attention of the public and changed everything. Composer Jay Livingston noted that Elvis took time to prove himself, slowly climbing the music ladder before his big breakthrough. Elvis's name, which some initially mispronounced, had interesting roots. Genealogist Elbert Schnerdel explained that Elvis has connections to Norse mythology and other words meaning win or prosper. Elvis didn't like being called Elvis the Pelvis, finding it demeaning, as references to his physical appearance were often seen as vulgar at the time. On stage, Elvis was a dynamic performer. His early nervousness turned into confidence, and his physical expressions, like leg shaking, became part of his charm. Clinical psychologist Paul Meehl pointed out that Elvis used his whole body to express himself, something that fit him well since he wasn't meant to be a stiff, reserved performer. As Elvis grew more comfortable, he embraced his sexuality, which became a key part of his stage presence. Despite his charisma, Elvis wasn't without his critics. Some male musicians and audience members resented his sex appeal, feeling threatened. Even Doc Severinsen, a musician, admitted there was jealousy among some peers. Elvis's masculinity was often scrutinized, with some viewing him as too sexy for a man at the time. Elvis's death in his 20s turned him into a martyr of sorts, earning him sympathy from many, even from those who had previously disliked him. His draft into the army was seen as a respite by many, as it was felt he needed to mature and shed some of the sex symbol image. However, psychologist Joyce Brothers noted that the public's perception of Elvis changed from a rebellious figure in the 50s to a more tamed image in the 60s, thanks to Hollywood's influence. In the end, Elvis's life was marked by extraordinary talent, scandal, and a legacy that continues to captivate people around the world. His story serves as a reminder of the complexities of fame and the impact one person can have on culture and history.